It starts on a beach. December 1st, 1948. Somerton Beach, just outside Adelaide, Australia. The sun is coming up. A man is lying on the sand, his head propped against the seawall. He looks like he's sleeping, he's dressed well. A suit, a tie, nice shoes, too well for the beach. A half-smoked cigarette rests on his collar, held there by his cheek, as if it fell from his lips just as he drifted off. But he isn't sleeping, he's dead. And that's where the mystery begins. Not just a mystery, but one of Australia's most enduring, most bizarre puzzles. For more than 70 years, he was known only as the Somerton Man. He had no wallet, no identification. The tags on all his clothes were snipped off. Nobody knew who he was, where he came from, or how he died. The case was a collection of strange, disconnected clues that led nowhere. A suitcase with more clothes with the tags cut out. A hidden pocket in his trousers. A tiny, rolled-up piece of paper from a rare book of poetry. A secret code written on the back of that book. A mysterious nurse who seemed to know him but wouldn't say. For decades, that's where it stayed. A cold case that was more folklore than fact. A story about spies and secret lovers and untraceable poisons. It seemed impossible to solve. The man on the beach was a ghost. Then came DNA. Not just any DNA analysis, but a new kind of genetic investigation. Forensic genealogy. It's the same technology that caught the Golden State Killer. And it gave investigators a new tool, a way to reach back through time and give the Somerton Man his name back. This isn't just about a new piece of technology. It's about how a few strands of hair, trapped in a plaster cast for 70 years, could finally unravel a story that had been stuck on its first page. The police who found the man on the beach that morning had no idea what they were dealing with. They assumed he'd had a heart attack or drowned and washed ashore, but the scene was too neat. His clothes were clean and dry, except for his shoes, which were damp from the tide. His body showed no signs of violence. An autopsy was ordered. The local pathologist, Dr. John Cleland, was stumped. The man was in peak physical condition. He was about 40 to 45 years old, 5 feet 11 inches tall, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. His hands were soft and clean, not those of a laborer. His calf muscles were high and developed, like a dancer or someone who wore heeled boots. His toes were wedged together, also suggesting he wore pointed shoes. Everything about him suggested a man who took care of himself. But inside, things were strange. His spleen was 3 times its normal size. His liver was damaged. His stomach was full of blood. The doctor suspected poison. It was the most logical explanation for a sudden death with no visible cause. But what kind? They tested for all the common poisons. Nothing. The pathologist suggested a rare, fast-acting poison, something like digitalis or strophanthin. These are hard to detect, especially with 1940s technology. They could kill quickly and leave almost no trace. The problem was, these poisons usually cause vomiting. The Somerton Man hadn't vomited. His last meal, a meat pasty, was still in his stomach. The cause of death was officially listed as unknown. The coroner said he was sure it was poison, but he couldn't prove it. The police were at a dead end. They had a body with no name and no cause of death. They fingerprinted him, but his prints weren't in any Australian database or any international ones they could check. They put his photo in the papers. They put out descriptions. Hundreds of people came forward to identify him, but each one was a false lead. He was nobody. A month later, they got a break. A brown suitcase was found in the luggage room at the Adelaide railway station. It had been checked in on November 30th, the day before the body was found. Inside was a collection of clothes. A dressing gown, slippers, pajamas, shirts, underwear. Just like the clothes on the body, every single tag had been carefully removed. One tie had the name Uti Keen on it. A laundry bag had Keen on it. A singlet had a Keen tag, but with the E crossed out. Was this his name? The police searched for any missing person named Keen. They found no one who matched. There were other odd things in the suitcase. A stencil kit, the kind used for marking cargo on ships. A sharpened table knife. A thread card of orange wax thread, which was not sold in Australia. An analysis of the man's coat showed it had been stitched in a way that was specific to American manufacturing. So, was he an American named Keen? It was another lead that went nowhere. The name was a dead end. The case went cold again. The body was embalmed to preserve it, in the hope that someone would eventually claim it. A plaster cast was made of the man's head and shoulders. He lay in the morgue for months. Then, the strangest clue of all emerged. Months after the body was found, the pathologist, Dr. Cleland, re-examined the man's clothes. He found something he'd missed the first time. A tiny, hidden fob pocket sewn into the waistband of the man's trousers. Inside was a small, tightly rolled piece of paper. When they unrolled it, they saw 2 words, printed in a fancy font Tamam Shud. A local librarian identified the phrase. It was Persian. It meant, It is ended or it is finished. It was the final phrase from a collection of poems called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. This was a bombshell. A suicide note? A message? Police launched a nationwide search for the specific book this scrap of paper had been torn from. And they found it. A man came forward. He said that right after the body was found, he had found a rare copy of the Rubaiyat in the back of his unlocked car, which he'd parked near Somerton Beach. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time and just tossed it in his glove box. But after seeing the police appeal in the paper, he checked the book. The last page was torn out. The scrap of paper with Tamam Shud was a perfect match. This was the biggest break in the case yet. And inside the back cover of the book, written in pencil, were 5 lines of capital letters. Cryptographers from the military and universities tried to crack it. They failed. To this day, nobody knows what it means. Is it a real code? Is it just gibberish? The first line looks similar to the first letters of the first 4 stanzas of the book, but the rest doesn't fit any pattern. It was another puzzle within the puzzle, but there was something else in the book. A phone number, also written in pencil. The police traced the number. It belonged to a young woman, a nurse who lived just a short walk from Somerton Beach. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though she went by Jo. At the time, she asked to remain anonymous, so the public only knew her as Justin. When the police showed her the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face, she had a strange reaction. One detective said she was completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint. She looked at the bust, then looked away and wouldn't look at it again. She seemed shocked or scared, but she denied everything. She said she didn't know the man. She had no idea why her phone number would be in his book. She did admit that she once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. She said she had given it as a gift to a man named Alfred Boxall, an army lieutenant she had known during the war. Police must have thought this was it. The Somerton man must be Alfred Boxall. They found him, alive and well, living in Sydney, and he still had the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jessica had given him. It was a completely different edition. It still had the phrase Tamam Shud on the final page. So, the book found in the car wasn't Jessica's gift to Boxall. The dead man wasn't Boxall. The lead evaporated. Jessica Thompson offered no more information. She was a dead end too. But a very suspicious one. Why did she react that way? Was she protecting someone? Was she scared of something? Her connection to the case remained one of its most tantalizing mysteries. And that's where the investigation stopped. The Somerton man was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery in June 1949. The headstone read, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." The police file remained open, but the trail was cold. The story, with its mix of poetry, poison, and secret codes, became a legend. Theories blossomed. Was he a spy? The Cold War was just beginning. Australia had a rocket testing range at Woomera, not far from Adelaide. Maybe he was a Soviet agent poisoned by his own side or by the West. The stenciling kit, the American-made coat, the untraceable poison, it all fit the spy narrative. Or was it a simpler, more tragic story? A love affair gone wrong? Did he come to Adelaide to see Jessica Thompson, the nurse? Did she reject him? Did he kill himself on the beach near her home, leaving the cryptic? It is finished as his final word. For 70 years, there were no new answers. The mystery was a perfect circle of questions. Each clue led to another clue, which led back to the beginning. The man's identity was the key. Without a name, you couldn't find his family, his history, his enemies, or his friends. You couldn't know why he was in Adelaide, and without his name, the case would never be solved. The decades passed, the original investigators died, witnesses passed away. The evidence sat in police archives, but the story didn't die. It fascinated a new generation of researchers, amateur sleuths, and academics. One of them was Derek Abbott, a professor at the University of Adelaide. He wasn't a detective or a forensic scientist. He was an engineer and physicist, but he became obsessed with the case, particularly the code. He and his students spent years trying to crack it, using modern computational analysis. Well, they couldn't, but Abbott's research led him down another path. He became convinced the key was Jessica Thompson, the nurse. He dug into her life. He found out she had a son, Robin, who was born in 1947. This was just before the Somerton man was found. Robin grew up to be a professional ballet dancer, which fit with the pathologist's observation about the man's well-developed calf muscles. And Abbott noted that Robin had 2 rare genetic traits, a dental anomaly where his canines were next to his incisors, and a specific ear shape called a Simba concha superior. The Somerton man's autopsy photos and plaster cast showed he had the exact same 2 rare traits. The coincidence was too much to ignore. Abbott began to believe that the Somerton man was Robin's father, and that Jessica Thompson had lied to police to protect her family and her reputation. In the 1940s, having a child out of wedlock was a huge scandal. If the Somerton Man was her lover and he had come to Adelaide to see her and their son, it would explain her strange reaction. It would provide a motive. Abbott even met and eventually married Robin's daughter Rachel, connecting his own family directly to the mystery he was trying to solve. But proving the connection required more than just physical similarities, it required DNA. For years, there was no way to get it. The body had been buried for decades, and the embalming fluid would have destroyed most of the genetic material. Then, the world of forensics changed. A new field called investigative genetic genealogy emerged. It was a powerful new tool for cracking cold cases. The process is both simple in concept and incredibly complex in practice. You start with DNA from an unknown person, like a crime scene sample or unidentified remains. You create a genetic profile and upload it to public genealogy databases like GEMatch or Family Tree DNA, where people share their own DNA results to find relatives. You're not looking for an exact match, you're looking for distant cousins, third, fourth, or even fifth cousins who share small segments of DNA with your unknown person because they share a common ancestor from generations ago. Once you find these distant relatives, the real work starts. You build their family trees using public records like birth certificates, census data, and obituaries. You build the trees back in time until you find the common ancestors they all share. Once you have those great-great-great-grandparents, you start building the family tree forward. You trace all of their descendants, generation by generation, until you get to the present day. You are essentially recreating the unknown person's entire family tree. Eventually, you hope to find a branch of the family with a person who fits the profile of your unknown individual. Someone who was born in the right year, lived in the right place, and who disappeared or was unaccounted for around the time the body was found. This technique led to the stunning arrest of the Golden State Killer in 2018. It has since solved hundreds of cold cases, and it offered a glimmer of hope for the Somerton Man. If they could just get a usable sample of his DNA, they could build his family tree. They could finally give him a name. The first major step was getting the DNA. The South Australian police had been hesitant to exhume the body. It was expensive, and there was no guarantee it would work. The formaldehyde used in the 1940s embalming process was known to shred DNA into tiny, unusable fragments. But Abbott and other advocates pushed hard. They argued that technology had advanced enough to make it worth the risk. Finally, in 2021, the government gave its approval. The Somerton Man's grave was dug up. The world watched, waiting to see if science could finally solve the 73-year-old mystery. The police forensic team went to work on the exhumed remains. It was a slow, painstaking process. They had to see if they could extract any viable DNA from the bones or teeth that had been sitting in the ground for so long. But Derek Abbott had another idea. He was working with a renowned American forensic genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick was a pioneer in the field. She had a PhD in physics, just like Abbott, and she specialized in using DNA to identify historical remains. They knew the police investigation would take time and might not even succeed. So they looked for another source of DNA, and they found one. It had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. The plaster cast. When the police made the cast of the man's head and shoulders back in 1949, a few of his hairs got trapped in the plaster. Hair shafts themselves don't contain nuclear DNA, the kind you need to build a full family tree. But the hair follicles, the roots do. Abbott and his team carefully examined the cast at the South Australian Museum. They found several hairs. They managed to extract them without damaging the historic bust. This was their long shot. These hairs were over 70 years old. But they were protected from the elements, sealed inside the plaster. They sent them to a specialized lab in the United States. The first tests were promising. They were able to get a mitochondrial DNA profile. This type of DNA is passed down from mother to child, so it can trace a person's maternal line. It was a good start, but it wasn't enough to identify a specific person. They needed nuclear DNA, which comes from both parents. They tried again, and they got it. Against all odds, the lab was able to extract enough nuclear DNA from the hair follicles to create a full genetic profile. It was the breakthrough they had been dreaming of for years. Now the real detective work began. In early 2022, they uploaded the Somerton Man's DNA profile to GEMatch. The database searched for matches, and it found them. Not close relatives, but distant ones. A list of second, third, and fourth cousins. These were people who had no idea they were related to a man found dead on an Australian beach in 1948. Abbott and Fitzpatrick now had a list of names. Their task was to build the family trees for every single one of them. It was a monumental undertaking. They started tracing each person's ancestry back through the 19th and 20th centuries. They were looking for the intersection points, the common ancestors who connected all these different people to each other and to the Somerton Man. After weeks of intense genealogical research, they found them. A set of great-great-grandparents. Now, they had the top of the family tree. The next step was to build it downwards, tracing every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild. Sure, they were looking for a man born around 1905 who had dropped off the radar around 1948. They built a tree with over 4,000 names on it. They sifted through the branches. They eliminated people who had died before 1948 or who were accounted for after that date. They focused on the male lines, and then they found him. A name on one of the branches, a man who fit the profile. His name was Carl Charles Webb. He was born on November 16th, 1905, in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne. He was the youngest of 6 children. He was an electrical engineer and an instrument maker. The age was perfect. He would have been 43 in 1948, right in the 40 to 45 age range the pathologist had estimated. The physical description fit. Photos of his brothers showed a family resemblance. His profession as an instrument maker might explain his clean, soft hands. It could even explain the mysterious code. Was it some kind of technical shorthand or personal notes? Abbott and Fitzpatrick dug deeper into Carl Webb's life. They found public records. They learned he had married. His wife's name was Dorothy Jean Webb, but she went by Doff. They had no children. The marriage was not a happy one. Records show that Dorothy had left him. In 1947, she moved to Adelaide. Suddenly, the story started to make sense. It wasn't a Cold War spy thriller. It was a domestic tragedy. A man whose marriage had fallen apart. A man who, it seemed, had traveled from Melbourne to Adelaide to find his estranged wife. This provided a powerful human motive for his journey. It explained why he was in Adelaide. The pieces started to fall into place. The name T. Keane on the tie. Webb's brother-in-law was named Thomas. Maybe the clothes belonged to him? Or maybe they were just secondhand clothes and the name was a coincidence. The American stitching on the coat, it might just mean he bought an imported coat. The mysterious poisons. Maybe he had obtained something through his work as an instrument maker, or had found a way to take his own life that wouldn't be easily traced. The desire for anonymity, cutting the tags from his clothes, might have been driven by shame or a wish to simply disappear without causing trouble for his family. What about Jessica Thompson, the nurse? The linchpin of the love affair theory for so many years. The new identification suggested a different connection. Her husband, Prosper Thompson, may have known Carl Webb. There was no direct evidence, but the possibility was there. Or perhaps the phone number in the book was a complete red herring. As for Derek Abbott's long-held theory that the Somerton Man was the father of her son Robin, DNA provided a definitive answer. Abbott and Fitzpatrick were able to trace Robin's DNA through his descendants. It showed no genetic link to Carl Webb. The Somerton Man was not his father. Science had disproved one theory, while simultaneously proving another. In July 2022, Derek Abbott and Colleen Fitzpatrick announced their findings. They were confident. The DNA evidence was strong. The genealogical work was thorough. The Somerton Man was Carl Charles Webb. After 74 years, the ghost on the beach had a name. Is the case closed? Not quite. The identification of Carl Webb is a monumental breakthrough. It's the answer to the biggest question, but it's not the end of the story. Officially, the South Australian police have not yet confirmed the identity. They are still working on the DNA they extracted from the exhumed body. Their process is more rigorous and requires a higher standard of proof, often needing a direct DNA comparison with a living relative. Abbott and Fitzpatrick's work, while groundbreaking, is still technically that of private researchers, but their conclusion is widely accepted as the solution to the identity puzzle. And even with a name, other questions linger. The biggest one is still, how did he die? And knowing he was Carl Webb, a man searching for his wife, makes suicide seem more plausible. He finds her, she rejects him, and in despair, he ends his life on a nearby beach. The phrase "Tom, I'm should, it is finished" takes on a new poignant meaning. But it's not proven. Could someone have met him on the beach? Could Dorothy Webb or someone connected to her have been involved? We still don't know. The cause of death remains a mystery. And what about the code? The 5 lines of jumbled letters, it's still gibberish. With Webb's identity known, researchers can now look at it through a new lens. Was it related to his work in electrical engineering? Was it a betting ledger for horse races, as some have suggested? Or was it simply the frantic scribblings of a disturbed mind? The code remains unsolved, a final piece of enigma. But the most important part of the story has changed. For over 7 decades, the Somerton Man was a blank slate, a character in a spy novel. People projected their own theories onto him. He was a symbol of the unknown. Now he is a person, Carl Webb, a man born in Melbourne who had a family, a job, a wife, and a life that ended tragically on a lonely beach. The DNA didn't just give him a name, it gave him a story, a sad human story. It might not have the romance of international espionage, but it feels more real. The journey to find his name is a testament to perseverance. To the police who never closed the file. To the amateur sleuths who kept the story alive. And to the new science that allowed a few strands of hair to build a bridge across time, connecting a few distant cousins living today to a single man who died alone in 1948. We may never know exactly what happened in Carl Webb's final hours. We may never know for sure if he died by his own hand or another's. We may never crack his code. Some parts of the mystery may remain, but the central question, the one that haunted investigators and dreamers for generations, has been answered. Who was the Somerton Man? He was Carl Webb, and he is unknown no more.